The Xelari Dominion had seen countless worlds fall before them. Their empire stretched across the void, swallowing civilizations whole, leaving only silence in their wake. They had encountered resistance before, but nothing that could withstand the efficiency of their war machine. Conquest was inevitable. When their fleet reached Earth, they expected another effortless victory. Initial scans revealed primitive structures, scattered military installations, and no planetary defense network strong enough to pose a real threat. There were no orbital defenses, no energy shields, just a species that had barely begun to explore the stars. It was almost disappointing. The first wave of landers descended, deploying scouting teams across major population centers. They expected terrified civilians, perhaps desperate attempts at communication, or even open surrender. Instead, they were met with nothing. Cities lay empty. Streets abandoned. The only sounds were the hum of their scanners and the distant wind carrying the scent of rain. The silence unsettled them. Where was the resistance? Where were the panicked broadcasts? Other species had begged for mercy the moment Xelari ships entered their orbit. But the humans had simply vanished. The Dominion's war doctrine dictated caution in unfamiliar environments, but the absence of any immediate hostility made them overconfident. Their commanders assumed the humans had fled into hiding, that they would soon emerge, desperate and broken, once their food supplies dwindled. It was always the same. A simple waiting game. Then the first squad went missing. A routine patrol through the skeletal remains of a once bustling metropolis. 7 trained Xelari soldiers. Heavily armored, equipped with motion sensors, energy rifles, and aerial support. Their last transmission had been uneventful, a standard status update. Then nothing. No distress signal. No gunfire. Just silence. Drones were dispatched to investigate, sweeping the area with infrared and motion tracking. The squad's locator beacons remained in place, clustered together in an alleyway. But when the drones arrived, they found only equipment. Helmets, weapons, armor, discarded, blood-stained. But no bodies. No signs of struggle. As if they had simply vanished. More squads were sent out. More patrols disappeared. The few that returned spoke in hushed, terrified whispers of shadows moving through the ruins, of figures too fast to track, too silent to detect. They described traps, crude but effective, designed not just to kill, but to incapacitate, to take them alive. And then came the screams. The Xelari do not feel fear as lesser beings do, but something about those sounds, inhuman, guttural, drawn-out cries of agony, shook even the most hardened veterans. At first, they assumed it was their own soldiers, wounded and pleading for aid. But the recordings told a different story. The voices weren't Xelari. They were mimicking them. It became clear, too late, that the humans were not hiding out of fear. They were waiting, watching, preparing. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the Xelari realized the truth. They were not the hunters. They were the prey. The Xelari had faced resistance before, but never like this. Their enemies had always relied on numbers, technology, or brute force. But humans fought differently. They didn't charge blindly into battle. They didn't engage in direct confrontation unless it was on their terms. They were stalking the Xelari, studying them, breaking them down piece by piece. At first, the commanders dismissed it as cowardice. But as more units disappeared without a trace, as more outposts fell silent, the truth became undeniable. The humans weren't fighting a war. They were hunting. It started with psychological warfare. The Xelari's advanced sensors were useless. The humans moved too fast, too unpredictably, appearing and disappearing between scans. Their heat signatures blended with the environment, their movements eerily precise. Every night, the Xelari would hear distant whispers, unintelligible murmurs carried by the wind. Sometimes, they heard their own voices, recorded from fallen soldiers and played back over hijacked comms. Then came the bodies. Not Xelari. Human. Or at least, that's what they wanted the invaders to think. They found mannequins, dummies dressed in scavenged armor, placed in strategic positions to lure their forces into traps. The moment a squad engaged, the real attack came from the shadows, silent, efficient, merciless. The Xelari soldiers were elite, trained in countless forms of combat, yet they never saw their killers coming. Captured footage from fallen soldiers' helmet cams revealed the horrifying truth. Humans were faster than expected, stronger than their lean frames suggested, capable of unrelenting endurance. They didn't just kill, they dragged bodies away into the darkness, leaving no trace. The Xelari had encountered predators before, but none like this. None that seemed to enjoy the hunt. Desperate for answers, the Dominion scientists analyzed the few human bodies recovered. What they found was disturbing. Humans were not the fragile creatures they had assumed. Their bodies were built for persistence hunting, capable of chasing prey for days without rest. Their muscles, while appearing weak compared to many alien species, were exceptionally efficient, allowing for bursts of speed and unmatched recovery. Their minds were even worse, adaptable, unpredictable, their problem-solving ability far exceeding anything the Xelari had encountered. The most terrifying discovery, however, was something no scan could have predicted. Humans thrived in high-stress environments. While other species faltered under pressure, humans became sharper, deadlier. Fear didn't weaken them, it fueled them. The Xelari commanders refused to believe it. No species could be that dangerous. But their troops told a different story. The fear among them was growing, spreading like a virus. Soldiers reported seeing movement where there was none, feeling eyes watching them from every shadow. Some refused to leave their encampments at night. Others whispered of monsters, of figures with glowing eyes that vanished before they could fire. And then, without warning, entire battalions began disappearing. Not wiped out in battle. Not destroyed by superior firepower. They simply stopped responding. The Xelari were the most advanced hunters in the galaxy. But they had made a mistake. They had entered a world ruled by something far worse. A species that did not fear the dark. A species that became the dark. The Xelari command had no choice but to acknowledge the unthinkable. Their forces were losing not to superior numbers or advanced weaponry, but to something far worse. The humans had turned their own world into a battlefield where they controlled every variable. Every street, every ruined structure, every inch of terrain worked against the invaders. No safe zones. No fallback positions. Only death, waiting in the shadows. Desperation set in. The remaining forces consolidated into heavily fortified zones, layering defenses with energy shields and automated turrets. Air support was deployed around the clock. They tried to create a perimeter, to push the enemy back, to carve out even a fraction of control. It didn't matter. The humans had already decided how this war would end. The first sign of their counterattack was the silence. No more skirmishes. No more scattered ambushes. The humans disappeared, vanishing from scanners entirely. 4 hours, the Xelari command dared to hope that the worst had passed. That the enemy had finally broken. That they had secured a foothold. Then the power failed. Not a localized disruption, a complete blackout. Defense grids flickered and died. Targeting systems collapsed. The towering shield generators, designed to withstand orbital strikes, imploded from within. The humans had infiltrated their systems, using the Xelari's own technology against them. And with every layer of protection stripped away, they finally struck. Not with overwhelming force, not with direct confrontation, but with terrifying precision. The first casualties never even saw their attackers. Snipers picked off officers in command centers through solid walls. Supply lines were cut in an instant. Medical stations were burned to the ground, ensuring no one would recover from their wounds. The wounded weren't just left behind, they were targeted first, eliminating any chance of regrouping. Then the psychological assault resumed. Voices on open comms, not in their own language, but in perfect Xelari dialect. Taunting, mocking, repeating the final words of fallen soldiers. The troops broke long before the real slaughter began. Some turned their weapons on themselves, choosing a clean death over whatever fate the humans had in store. Others ran. It made no difference. They were already marked. When the last stronghold fell, there was no final stand. No glorious last effort. Just panicked, desperate beings trying to escape. They scrambled for dropships, abandoning their weapons, trampling their own in a frenzy to flee. It was chaos, pure and absolute. And then, as the first transport lifted off, it exploded. Not shot down. Not hit by an external weapon. Detonated from the inside. The humans had anticipated their retreat, planting explosives on every possible exit route. One by one, the fleeing ships erupted in fire, turning the sky into a burning graveyard. There was no mercy. No survivors. The last Xelari officer on the ground managed a single transmission before his signal was cut. A single, desperate whisper to the fleet above. "They aren't letting us leave." Then, only static. The few Xelari who survived the massacre fled in chaos, scrambling for extraction points, abandoning weapons, armor, anything that slowed them down. They no longer cared about conquest. They only wanted to escape. When the last remaining transports lifted off, their pilots refused to look back. The ground below was a graveyard, a wasteland of ruined war machines and shattered bodies. But there were no human corpses among them. Only Xelari. Only the hunted. The survivors, broken and trembling, returned to their fleet in orbit. Their reports were fragmented, incoherent, a mixture of fear, confusion, and disbelief. Their commanders demanded explanations, but there were none. Tactical failures could be analyzed. Strategic miscalculations could be corrected. But this was something else. The Dominion's leadership reviewed the recovered footage, but there was nothing concrete. Just glimpses, shadows moving in the periphery, figures emerging from the darkness for seconds before vanishing again. The most disturbing part wasn't what was seen. It was what was.